Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hughes, and I am the music director of the Chicago Master Singers. Welcome to another session of CMS University. I'm glad you're here, and I want each of you to feel that you are part of this online community that we are building together. Now, one of the ways that we're doing that is through the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. And everyone is welcome to join that conversation. You don't have to be a member of CMS or anything. The first thing to do, though, is to log into YouTube, and then you'll be able to jump in and say hi and ask questions. Even ask questions of me if you're watching this live on Monday evening. I just ask that you start anything intended for me with a couple question marks in a row. That way, when I do have time to glance over at the screen, I can quickly see what's intended for me and what's part of the general conversation. And I'll even put your questions up on the screen as time allows, and I'll give them my best shot to provide you an answer. So please use that. It's really fun to see friendships be maintained and grow, and even new friendships forged through this small but mighty chat window. All right, let's get into our topic tonight, which is our third Inside the Score presentation. Previously, we've talked about the Mozart Solemn Vespers and the Stravinsky Symphony of Psalms. Later on in the semester, our final class this semester will be on the Handel Messiah. But tonight we're talking all about Fauré's Requiem, probably a favorite among many choral singers. This is such a moving work that we all love, and I hope to share some new insights for you, even if you've sung this or conducted it as I have. All right, so we'll start with just an overview of Fauré here. He was born in 1845, died in 1924, and whenever I think about Fauré's dates and kind of who was also writing at that time, they don't seem to line up sometimes. It feels like Fauré is almost an old soul during his lifetime in terms of his musical style. It's so melodic and comforting, and something that we don't always see at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 20th century. But I think it's just lovely music, and I'm sure you feel the same way. So a little bit about him. First of all, he kind of held two positions in his career, or at least notable ones. The first one was as the choir master at La Madeleine in Paris, a very prestigious church, where he succeeded his teacher, Sanctus, in that position. He was also the director of the acclaimed Paris Conservatory, where he had many students who went on to great success, including Maurice Ravel and Nadia Boulanger, which both of whom are pictured here. So a very kind of high stature musician in his life. Now a little bit about his Requiem, just to kind of lay the groundwork. He wrote this over a period of time from 1888 to 1891, and even after that, after the kind of the nuts and bolts of the piece were in place, he revised it throughout his career, and I'll be kind of walking you through those stages of composition in a little bit. The piece itself is 7 movements long, about 35 minutes, and that was what Fauré himself said. So we kind of know that our tempos, we can kind of glean from that insight that he left us. Now, there are two main themes in my mind in Fauré's Requiem. The first is that he was not really devout or a real strong believer. His son described him as a skeptic, and we see that not only in his quotes about the piece, but also in the piece itself, and I'll be talking about that tonight. The other kind of big theme in the Fauré Requiem is rest, and that's really how he viewed death. And so it's really all about kind of this eternal nothingness and allowing the troubles of the world to leave you. That's really how he viewed death, and we see that in his writing as well. Now, what makes the Fauré Requiem so beautiful is that he was a melodist, right? There's just beautiful melody after beautiful melody, and while a lot of us know these movements and think, oh, the Pia Jesu is just so gorgeous, and then you think, that's my favorite movement. Well, then you hear the Sanctus, and then you're like, well, that's pretty good too. And then you hear In Paradisum, and you're like, man, that's another. It's just one beautiful melody after another. And then you layer in his kind of French harmonies, and it's really a winning combination. So I'm looking forward to sharing these themes with you tonight. Now, we're going to start by looking at some quotes of Fauré, right? We have quotes from him talking about this piece. And here's one. He refers to this piece as the only time he managed to entertain in the way of religious illusion. Everything about religion that he refers to as an illusion, he put into his Requiem. So again, we see kind of that skepticism. And at the end of this quote, that is dominated from beginning to end by a very human feeling of faith in eternal rest, right? Not eternal life or salvation, but rest, right? So we see that here. Another one, his Requiem was composed for fun. Maybe a little odd. Another one, someone referred to his Requiem as being a lullaby of death, and that's how he saw death, as a happy deliverance, an aspiration toward happiness above, rather than as a painful experience. I think there's one. Oh, that's it. So again, we start to see these themes of skepticism and also rest, even before we've heard the piece itself. Now, as I mentioned, he really worked on this piece for several years and continually tinkered with it. In 1888, this is when the first version appears, and it was at a performance of a, I don't mean this pejoratively, but a common parishioner's funeral. He just wrote it and performed it. At this time, the Requiem only had 5 movements, so there wasn't the Offertory or the Libera in this first version. So very small forces here, soprano soloist, choir, violin solo for the Sanctus, and low strings, harp, timpani, and organ. So very, very much a practical piece for a practical church service, right? Not that many instruments, not that big. He expands it in 1893 by adding the Offertory and the Libera movements, and then adds more to the orchestra. So the baritone soloist, who's in both of those additional movements, and then he adds some trumpets, horns, and bassoons. At this point, I think, in my opinion, Fauré was pretty content with the work, this expanded chamber version. However, in 1900, his publisher came to him and said, you know, this piece would get more performances and therefore more sales, right, if you expanded it to be for full orchestra. So this is why we call it the symphonic version. And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? The smaller orchestration can at times be difficult to pair with other things in a concert setting, because what do you put with it? If you only have one violin hired, what do you partner with this chamber version? So the publisher was kind of thinking in terms of business and said, why don't you flesh it out into a full symphony, and then it'll get more performances. And Fauré obliged. However, he did not do that additional orchestration work himself. Rather, he gave it to a student, as all good professors would do. And so this Jean-Roger Ducasse was the one who actually completed the orchestration. And the reason that we think that is that there are a number of errors in the original publication from 1900. And that would have been very atypical for Fauré, who was very fastidious. And so therefore it's kind of thought that one of his students, in particular Ducasse, is the one to have done this. And here he added flutes and clarinets as well as violin sections. So makes it more of that symphonic sound that you might have heard or even performed. By the way, before we talk about the structure, I'm a big proponent of the 1893 version, the chamber version. Not that I think the symphonic one is not good. I think it's great, but I think the chamber one is maybe a little bit closer to how Fauré envisioned the piece. So when we look at the score and listen to recordings tonight, that's what we're going to be listening to. Okay, so the structure, 7 movements long. You can see them listed here. You might notice a little bit of a pattern, and I've kind of laid it out here on the next slide. So the central movement 4, the Pie Jesu, is the centerpiece of the work. And this is for soprano solo, right? Now, sometimes we talk in music, in choral music, about a chiastic structure, which is really a palindrome. So in this case, that would be 1 and 7 are related. Let me get my hands together. 1 and 7 are related, then 2 and 6, and then 3 and 5, and then the centerpiece. That would be chiastic. We see that in pieces like Bach's Jesu meine Freude and other works, okay? This is not chiastic because actually the first and fifth movements are related. So it's not palindromic, right? It's almost like the first half repeats itself in the second half. So 1 and 5 are related, 2 and 6 are related, and 3 and 7 are related. So it's more laddered in that way. And then with the Pie Jesu as a centerpiece. Now you'll notice that the forces for these paired movements are similar, right? So the baritone appears only in movements 2 and 6. Now, let's talk about it movement by movement, and we're not going to listen to every movement because it would go for the interest of time, but we'll talk about all of them, and I'll point out some things in each. So starting at the beginning, the Introit and Kyrie. This is in D minor, which is the same key as Mozart's Requiem, which we can assume Fauré was familiar with. And the first choral entrance of the Fauré Requiem begins with this unaccompanied homophonic texture. And this is very similar to the opening of Brahms' Requiem. So here's the Brahms, Selig sind, right? And we have this. Right, these very kind of exposed chords after the introduction in the orchestra. So very homophonic statement and unaccompanied. And we see the same thing happen here in the Fauré Requiem, right? We start with this big fat D minor chord, and then we have this Requiem aeternam. Right, so I believe that Fauré was intentional in paying homage to these earlier Requiem settings. We see also in this juxtaposition of Requiem, which means rest, right? A key word for Fauré, and Luceat, which light. And all the rest, the Requiems are set with a piano dynamic, and then the Luceat with forte. And we see that kind of right away here. The first choral entrances are pianissimo, and then for me, the top of the next page, we crescendo et lux perpetua, and light perpetual or everlasting, Luceat. So these are all forte here, and then it goes back to piano after that. So this alternation kind of immediately sets up a juxtaposition of rest and light. Now, we immediately see some beautiful melodic writing, which is clearly influenced by Gregorian chant. So the first one in here is in the soprano part. In the tenor part. So we have this beautiful melody. Requiem aeternam donae ramine. I'm sorry, the screen is so small. Right, so beautiful, beautiful melody there. And then the sopranos a little bit later have the Tedecit, which I think is also very nice. Right, so just these beautiful melodies with lush harmonies underneath them. The end of this movement is the Kyrie, right? So we have Introit and Kyrie. So the Kyrie, Lord have mercy, right? Very short here. And again, could be happenstance, but could also really demonstrate Fauré's real focus on rest versus judgment, right? And we'll see that throughout this piece. So that short Kyrie kind of demonstrates what he thought was important, the rest, and that the judgment that is sometimes associated with Requiem settings wasn't as important to Fauré. So we're going to listen to one performance of this, and this is that 1893 chamber version conducted by Philipp Herwege. And the picture on your screen, this isn't, you can't see the performance happening, but the picture is inside La Madeleine, the church where Fauré worked. So I hope you enjoy the first movement of the Requiem. Okay, the next movement we won't listen to, but I'll talk a little bit about, and that's the Offertory. Remember, this one does not appear in that original 1888 version and is only added in this expanded chamber version in 1893. Now, we see this throughout this Requiem, that Fauré kind of plays a little fast and loose with the text. This isn't a very liturgical Requiem setting like Mozart's, which follows the order explicitly. Fauré jumps around a little bit more. So normally after the Offertory, or the Introit and Kyrie, the next thing would be the Dies Irae, which Fauré basically skips. He comes back to it later on, and instead jumps straight to the Offertory. Now, within the Offertory text, Fauré eliminates several passages as well. So he's kind of just picking and choosing, maybe for time, maybe certain lines of text just didn't speak to him. And in this movement, we see kind of an A-B-A prime form. So the beginning of it is this imitative section between the altos and tenors. And I have to admit, this is maybe a little bit more austere than some of the other movements of the Fauré Requiem. But we have this imitative texture here at the beginning. And then everyone else kind of joins in. And then eventually here we get the baritone coming in at the Ostias movement, right? So this is the B section. And then finally at the end, after the baritone is done singing, we have a recapitulation of this imitative section. And just it's slightly different, which is why I called it B prime or A prime. So it's a little bit different. Imitation followed by an Amen at the end. Lovely movement, but I wanted to get on to some of the other movements. So we'll move on for that. Okay, the Sanctus, and I'll start by just addressing the meme right away. The altos, this is one of the most famous movements from the Fauré Requiem. It's often excerpted for church choirs and stuff. And the poor altos only sing at the very end for a couple measures. So they have to sit and listen to all this beautiful music and not sing. So I saw this meme a few weeks ago of Bernie waiting for the inauguration to start, and I thought it would be fitting to include here. Now the Sanctus, holy, 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 right? And Fauré does a really magnificent job depicting kind of a heavenly chorus, right? Not only through how the voices work, but also the accompaniment. So we have this beautiful harp and kind of fluttering violas here, and that's very lovely. And then we finally, we have this soaring violin solo, right? So this is just really beautiful, beautiful accompaniment. And again, we're really seeing Fauré's melodist side come out in this one. Now, one thing that I think is really interesting here is that even though this piece sounds so kind of simple and natural sounding, there's kind of this hemiola figure in it. So we have this Sanctus, Sanctus, right? This 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, right? So it's kind of like a 3 against 2 going on. And with all the 16th notes, it shouldn't be accented that way. But it does show that this is more than just a beautiful melody. It's really kind of intricately composed. All right, so let's listen to a little bit of the Sanctus, or actually all of it. My only criticism of that is I love when the tenors and basses come in with a Hosanna. And I always wish that he would do that a few more times. He kind of quits it too soon. Okay, the next movement then is the centerpiece, right? The Pie Jesu for soprano solo. Now this one is interesting because the text actually comes from the Dies Irae. So he's kind of going backwards. And even though he avoids much of the Dies Irae because I think because he is avoiding kind of the real strong themes of judgment in his Requiem setting, it makes sense why he picked this particular line, Blessed Jesus or Jesu, Lord, I pray in thy mercy grant them rest, right? So we see that key word again. Now, one of the things that I love about this piece is this is where we see this lullaby of death come through. And I think it really comes down to 4 notes. So kind of pointed them out here, but it's this minor third theme. And it comes back throughout this movement. So we see it here in the harp and strings. And we see it here again in the harp, just in a different key, in the organ, in the viola, in the organ, here as well. And then finally at the end, we hear it in all the parts, right? Especially here in the left hand of the organ. To me, those 4 notes, really that minor third has a very lullaby quality to it. And it's very reminiscent of someone like Vaughan Williams too. This very kind of oscillating, fluttering feeling throughout the movement, which I think is particularly effective. So let's listen to the Pie Jesu. Lovely. Okay, let's go on to the second half here, the Agnus Dei. This begins with a very sumptuous instrumental introduction, which could be a melodic theme in and of itself. It's really beautiful. You think, okay, maybe when the choir comes in, they're going to sing that, what we've just heard. But the way it works is this instrumental melody continues on, and on top of it, Fauré layers a new vocal melody. So here's the opening, right? Here's the instrumental melody, and I'll play it in a minute. And then when the tenors come in, at the top of the next page, they have a brand new, beautiful melody. So it's really two beautiful melodies happening at the same time. And one of the things that I like most about this is, I don't know, I just have this vision of this melody like as the title screen for a great PBS British period drama, right? With some country doctor dressed in tweed driving through the countryside. It's just so picturesque sounding, this. So I hope I didn't ruin it for you, but I just always picture this very British theme here, just countryside, very pastoral. Now, in addition to these beautiful melodies that we have, right, so not only that instrumental one, but then at the top of the next page, the tenor one, the Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, right, another beautiful, beautiful melody. Now, on top of that, then, we have all this very thick homophonic writing later on. So Fauré kind of shows both sides here. So here we have this A flat major chords to C minor, to C flat major, to G flat major, to B flat minor, to A major, to E major, and it just keeps going to G sharp minor, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful moment. So here we really see Fauré, not only is his melodist, right, which we've seen throughout this evening, and we'll continue to see, especially in the In Paradisum, that's just a beautiful melody, but we also see him as a real master of chord progressions and harmony as well. So let's listen for those elements. Let me see if I missed anything else. Oh, this ends with a recapitulation of the Requiem Aeternam from the first movement at the end of this Agnus Dei. So let's listen to this movement now. Okay, the penultimate movement of this piece is the Liberame. And this piece, remember, wasn't part of that original Requiem composition. In fact, the Liberame was composed in 1877, well before Fauré wrote this Requiem. And when he expanded it in 1893 for the chamber version, he inserted this Liberame. Now, previously in the original version, the 1877 version, it was for baritone soloist and organ, kind of a liturgical art song. And then he orchestrates it and inserts it into his Requiem, and I think it really works beautifully. Now, again, we see Fauré kind of taking some artistic liberties with the text here. He does not set the communion text, which typically would follow the Agnus Dei, and instead jumps to the Liberame, which isn't even part of the Requiem Mass. It's actually part of the burial rite. Now, this movement is the only kind of nod toward judgment in the Requiem by Fauré, but the fact that it's mostly sung by the baritone soloist really kind of makes it a very personal judgment, that judgment is really between the believer and God, rather than the scary doom and gloom that we see in so many other Requiem settings. So we won't listen to this one, again, in the interest of time, but it's a lovely movement. Okay, finally, the In Paradisum. This is just a lovely way to end the Requiem Mass, right? So again, this doesn't actually come from the Requiem Mass, so I shouldn't have said that. It's a lovely way to end the Requiem setting. It doesn't come from the Requiem Mass. The text actually comes from the burial rite. And much of this movement really functions as a melody, right? A kind of a French beautiful art song that's sung by the soprano section. And the other choral parts really kind of function as accompaniment. So sopranos, you're Gladys Knight, and the rest of us are the pips, right? Now, at the end of this movement, we have this final homophonic statement of Requiem, right? Which we've heard a couple times throughout the piece. But here at the end of this movement, we have it here with two sharps. We're now in D major, right? So in a way, this whole piece moves from D minor through all these beautiful, lush melodies and harmonizations to this ending in D major, where we end on the word Requiem, meaning rest. So let's listen to the In Paradisum. So just a few concluding remarks here. Such a lovely piece. And it was immediately recognized for that. This was a very popular piece right away. And it was actually performed at Fauré's funeral in November of 1924. And you can see in the picture here, this is the funeral procession for Fauré. So crowded streets, lots of admirers there. And in the bottom corner of the picture, you'll see a speaker's box with someone speaking, and that person is Nadia Boulanger, so who went on to be very, very famous and influential in her own right, speaking at her former teacher's funeral. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes this chamber version can be hard to pair, and we see composers like John Rutter and the one I listed here, Kevin Siegfried, writing pieces that were intended or are intended to be companion pieces for this chamber version of the Fauré Requiem. So I encourage you to check out, in particular, this Kevin Siegfried songs for the Journey. I think I played one of his compositions, not from that piece, but another one called Lay Me Low as a Moment of Zen in the Fall. A great American composer whose music I'm really interested in. So I'd encourage you to check out his music. If you're interested in learning more, there's tons of sources on Fauré and his Requiem, and here are just a few that I used in putting this together. So you can peruse these as you wish. I hope this has been a fun way to spend a Monday evening together. Thanks for joining me on this musical journey, and I hope you'll come back next week when I'll be talking all about how choir members can benefit from learning a little bit about the International Phonetic Alphabet. So we'll be learning some kind of the basic symbols and practicing interpreting them and on some choral texts. I know diction is an area that we all can always be growing in, so I hope you'll come back and get some tips here. To do so, register for the live stream using the Eventbrite link in the video description below. Please like the CMS on Facebook, like this video, subscribe to our channel, share it with a friend or family member who might be interested. Really, all are welcome at CMS University. So please join us. You can also donate and support us financially. A lot of arts organizations are persevering through this difficult time, including CMS. So if you're able to donate, all the links to these are in the video description below, and we really do appreciate your generosity. Thank you very much. Our moment of Zen, our little choral candy for the evening, I kind of alluded to it earlier, and that is that it's a piece by Vaughan Williams. One of my very favorite pieces of his is the 5 Mystical Songs, 5 settings of the great English poet George Herbert. And this movement, Love Bade Me Welcome, is my favorite movement of my favorite Vaughan Williams piece. And I think it's just so lovely and lush. And we do kind of hear this very Vaughan Williams or Fauré motivic connection here. So this is why I chose it tonight. Now, this is mostly for the baritone soloist, but at the very end, the choir comes in and is singing on Ah, this wordless melody. And if you know this piece, you know that that melody is a O Sacrum Convivium chant, which is a communion chant. And it perfectly kind of reinforces the text of, "You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat." I think it's such a beautiful image of love, and the pairing of the chant really enhances it for me, at least. So I hope you enjoy Love Bade Me Welcome from 5 Mystical Songs by Vaughan Williams.
Entrance here.
I love seeing all of you comment about your favorite Vaughan Williams pieces in the chat, and I'm nodding along saying, oh, that is a good one. I love that one too. Thanks again for joining me this evening, and I hope to see you next week. Until then, take care. Have a good night.